If I could ask all councillors to turn on their cameras, please, until the roll call has happened, that would be really helpful. My name is Councillor Ruth Dombey, and I am the chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee. You're all very welcome. A reminder that this meeting is being recorded. I would ask that when anyone is speaking, if you could please ensure that the camera is on. Otherwise, if you're not speaking, please do mute as there's interference. And it's entirely up to you if you want to keep the camera on at all times. I know some people struggle with bandwidth. So if you want to turn off the camera while you're not speaking, that's absolutely fine. And if you do wish to speak, if you could indicate in the chat, that would be really helpful. One of the things I've learned over the last few months is that it's quite difficult, not being in the room with you all, to understand when someone wants to come in on a point that's being made or on a new point. So if on the chat, when you indicate that you'd like to speak, if you could just indicate if you'd like to jump the queue, as it were, because you want to speak on an aspect that someone is speaking at that moment, I think that would be really helpful. Just helps with the flow of the debate. So I think everyone is here, and then in case we'll see when we come to the roll call. So can I hand over to the head of committee services, please? Just checking if yes, Alexa Coates, couldn't quite see you, Alexa, there you are. Would you like to just confirm attendance and then any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you. So I can see that present in the meeting we have councillors Dombey, McCoy, Aberlan, Batt, Crawley, Drummond, Foster, Garrett, Gordon, Haldane, Hicks, James, Pennick and Ramsey. I can't see Councillor Sakib, but I haven't received apologies.
That's fine, Alexa. I'm assuming he may be having a problem with his broadband. If someone would like to text him, that would be helpful and understand if he's struggling to get onto the meeting. But we're certainly quorate, so we can proceed. Does anyone have any declarations of interest to declare? I'm not seeing anyone indicating, so that's absolutely fine. I don't have any indication of any urgent business, so we move swiftly on to item 6. And COVID-19 update. And clearly this is an update. When the report went out, it was true at the time. It is extraordinary how quickly things change. And I have no doubt, sadly, that tomorrow things will be different again. But I'm going to hand over to the Chief Executive, Helen Bailey, to talk through the report, and possibly, Helen, as you go, update it, because as I say, a lot has happened in the last 10 days since the report was published. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Leader. As you say, a lot is happening, and actually we've got a couple of experts on the call. So I will simply draw your attention to a few things and then invite my colleagues, the Director of Public Health and the Director of Resources, to come in and update us. So this afternoon, as the Leader says, the Prime Minister has announced the new 3-tier system. And currently in London, we are in the medium tier. But as I'm sure the Director of Public Health will say, numbers are rising, although Sutton remains, for reasons that we haven't entirely got to the bottom of, the very lowest borough in London in terms of the infection rate. What the report does, though, is to address itself to what we have been doing over the past few weeks since we last reported to this committee. And in particular, I will invite the Director of Resources, Richard Simpson, to talk a little bit about the Test and Trace Support Scheme, which was announced on the 21st of September, and for which eligibility arose from the 28th of September, and which we have had to have in place from today. So in short order, that has been put into place. And I will ask him also to say a word or two about the infection control front. The Prime Minister has this evening announced some more money for local government, but as I speak, we have no clarity about how that will be divided or how much we will get or what the conditions will be about it. So anything we say will, I think, be speculation, but it is certainly good news. As any of you who have attended the building will have observed, we have a testing centre being erected. And I was going to say, as I speak, I think they've actually finished for the day, but in our car park at the back here. So there is going to be an expansion, and it's one of 3 new testing centres that will be opened in the borough. We are, as a staff team, readying ourselves, and we didn't know until today, and we still don't entirely know what we'll be expected to do next. But the Director of Public Health has been leading steps to make us ready to take on local track and trace work. and we are considering how we might best reconnect with those people who were shielding previously, so that should they need assistance going forwards. And again, I think we are due to hear tomorrow a little more about what the new announcements today might mean for those people required to shield. So we are thinking about how we might put in place those operations that we need to, working as we did before with our partners in the statutory and voluntary sector in order to do that. But I think that's probably enough for me. I will ask Richard Simpson to say a word or two about the test and trace support payments, and then Dr. Chowdhury to say a few words about where we are in public health terms. Richard.
Thank you, Helen. Richard?
Thanks, Leader. Thank you, Helen. So section 7 of the report on page 8 sets out in 7.1 and 7.2 what the scheme's all about. As Helen said, it's been quite, the team have been putting in quite a lot of work over the last 2 weeks to get the system up and running. And I'm pleased to say it went live on Friday evening on our website, and we got a couple of applications over the weekend. And by the end of today, we had 4 applications. We finally got access to the NHS database around test and trace about 2 o'clock this afternoon. So that was the final piece of the jigsaw that allows us to check the range of eligibility we need to check to determine whether someone is entitled to the £500 payment. So we expect, we were finishing off today the checks on the application we received, but we expect to get payments out either tomorrow or Wednesday to those who are eligible. And we will continue with communication colleagues to get out as much as we can about the scheme so people are aware of it. Helen also mentioned, which is in section 8, 8.1, 8.2, 8.3 and 8.4, the second tranche of infection control funding. This is broadly in line with the first tranche. So we received around, I think it was just over 2 million, 2.1 million from the first tranche, and that's all been allocated as per the conditions to providers, including care homes in the borough, and there's 2.3 million in the second tranche. So this is kind of to last hopefully from over the winter, so 3 or 4 months worth of payments that we will be getting out over the next few weeks to providers.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. And Dr. Chowdhury, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, so just to follow on from comments really, just to provide some updated information on the epidemiology of where we are in Sutton. So I think it would be fair to say that we are in a relatively good place given a very difficult situation in Sutton. Previously, the National Contain Framework for container virus spoke about becoming an area of national intervention or red area if rates in a borough exceeded 50 per 100,000 on a weekly basis. We are the last borough in London to cross over that threshold. We've just crossed that now. We're now at 56 per 100,000 cases every week. However, that's still slightly below London, which is almost at 90 per 100,000, and certainly at Richmond, there's about 100. They're at 141 per 100,000. So we've done relatively well. That's also in the light of testing going up. There were real concerns earlier on about a lack of testing capacity, but the testing capacity across London has increased considerably, actually. In addition, we haven't seen any new community outbreaks, particularly in our care homes, over the last 7 days. So fingers crossed. While I do expect further outbreaks in the future, at least I think that's an indication that we're doing well in terms of working together and collaboratively with NHS partners and private providers to try to prevent infections happening there and outbreaks occurring. Nevertheless, it's a difficult situation. At the beginning of the month, we were at 20. So we are, in essence, part of a rapid increase in rates. Within Sutton, a lot of that demographic profile of cases, it's occurring in the younger age groups, but actually all age groups up until about 50 years old are being affected. So certainly the working age population. And as we've mentioned, what can we do in terms of the immediate next steps? Well, clearly, some of it lies in our hands at local level, and we want to make sure that we've got as much testing capacity online as possible. So it's really great news that the additional local testing site at the car park is coming online. And I know Rob McNaught and Mark Noel have been working really hard to make sure that happens. There's an additional 2 testing sites coming on stream over the next couple of weeks, one at the Phoenix Centre and one at the David Weir Leisure Centre. So we'll have that will give us a total of 5 sites across the borough, which is good. We hope that testing capacity in terms of the kits remains robust, although there are concerns about that nationally. The other key element, I think, at a local level, which we're trying to do, is to set up a locally enhanced contact tracing service. So this is above and beyond, and in addition to the NHS test and trace service, often they're not able to test everyone who's positive. Roughly speaking, they get up to about 78%. And a locally enhanced service basically takes people who the national service can't track within 24 hours and sees whether the council staff, given their access to things like electoral rolls, council tax databases, can track people down and contact them. And certainly that's worked really well in some of the northern areas where they've hit 90%. Unfortunately, though, there isn't a single borough at the moment in southwest London who's got that service up and running yet. We've been on the waiting list with peers across southwest London for about 5 to 6 weeks now, and we're waiting to get a slot from the Department of Health and Social Care when they're ready to train staff up. So we're hoping that comes on stream soon. And then finally, I think the key thing going forward is clearly there are additional measures being announced today, and everything will become clearer as the guidance is published tomorrow. But the main message seems to be now the immediate additional measure is the restriction on socializing indoors, assuming that London is indeed in the medium level of the COVID alert system. So that's essentially where we are, if there are any questions on that.
Thank you, Dr. Chowdhury. And things do certainly move very quickly. If we were holding this meeting last week, I'm sure that you and I would be talking about the alarming infection rates in North East and North West London and wondering why South West London is so very different. Over the last 5 days, the London Borough of Richmond-upon-Thames has gone from being one of the lowest infection rates in London to first the highest and now the second highest. So it really does show that you can look at the numbers and think, oh, we're all right. But actually, for me, the important number for our borough isn't so much the absolute number, but it's the trend. And as you say, over the last week, our infection rates have doubled. We've gone from the 20s to the high 40s and now into the 50s. We are consistently, though, the lowest borough in London. And our positivity rates I saw today are also very low. I know you and I have had several conversations about that, and we've mulled over why that might be. It is a fact that we don't have a university in the borough, but Richmond-upon-Thames, I spoke to the leader, and they don't think that is the main cause of the problem. There is a suggestion, certainly as far as Richmond is concerned, that some of that increase could be because students at university are registered with their GPs at home. So there may be university students who have got the infection and are registered at their home address. And although there may be quite a few students from Richmond, I can't believe that that would justify the numbers. So it is puzzling and it is worrying. I had a meeting this afternoon with all London leaders, and we all agreed that while there is a huge gap in the numbers, some, as you say, some boroughs are over 100 per 100,000. We are the lowest, just over 50. We are agreed that it would be absurd to try and have restrictions that are different from borough to borough, or even sub-regionally groups of boroughs. It would make absolutely no sense. We are a city where people move, not so much at the moment, clearly, but generally, either because of work or because of their family or their leisure activities, they move around the boroughs. And it would be, I think, absurd to try and say that what holds true in Bromley is different in Sutton. I think it would be absolutely impossible to manage. And also, I think it's also in our best interest to move as one, because while the numbers may be higher in other boroughs, there's nothing to say that we won't suddenly have a spike, as has happened to Richmond. So I'm pleased to see that as a city, we are very much, all 33 leaders, 32 in the city, are very much on board with all of this, and that bodes well. I've got some questions for you, Dr. Chowdhury or or the chief executive. One is around the locally enhanced track and trace. You said there was a waiting list and we've been waiting for a few weeks. If you could just unpick that a little bit, because I'm surprised. If we're offering to help, I'm not sure why they're not picking up on our offer. So I've got three, so I'll give you all three. And the third one is definitely for the chief executive. So I'd like to understand the locally enhanced track and trace system and why we're not able to get going as quickly as we'd like. I think back to February, where the World Health Organization was saying test, test, test. I'm pleased to see that finally we're getting local test centres set up in our borough. Up until now, we haven't been able to do much testing. Again, I wonder if our low numbers are actually because there's not many people able to get a test, which is worrying in itself. So the fact that we'll now have 1 and then 3 test centres, possibly 4, is a really good thing. But I'd like to understand why they're not taking up our offer on locally enhanced track and trace. And then my second question is actually for Mr. Simpson. If you could explain, Mr. Simpson, the locally administered payment scheme for isolating individuals. I'm glad to see that it's now up and going, but I gather it's been a bit difficult with deadlines. It'd be helpful if you could talk us through exactly when we were asked to do what and by what time, just so we get a sense of the pressure that council officers are under and the deadlines that they're being asked to meet. And on that basis, my third question is for the Chief Executive. Councillor Crowley and Councillor McCoy and I were at the staff awards a few days ago, and I know all three of us were absolutely inspired to see the work that our council staff are doing, how committed they are, how hard they're working. I know, and I'm sure other councillors do as well, that when we email late at night, that's our choice. We work long hours, that's why we're elected politicians, but to have members of staff replying very late at night is a small indication, but a significant indication of just how very, very hard they're working. We know that members of staff have been deployed into essential services and have done so willingly, and that's also put pressure on other members of staff who have had to pick up their work. And I know from speaking to members of staff, none of whom are complaining, that the pressure is absolutely extraordinary, that working from home isn't always as straightforward as it might be, and that all of them are struggling with the crisis like the rest of us. So the thought I've had listening to what you said, Ms. Bailey, but also remembering back to the Staff Awards event, and I'm going to leave this as a third point, Councillor Crowley, because I think it would be nice if we could do this cross-party. I wonder if it would be possible to show our staff recognition of their extraordinary hard work, and obviously it isn't over, it will be going forward for many months. I realise that we are strapped for cash, and I don't think it would be appropriate to think about any sort of monetary awards, sadly. But I wonder if it would be possible to suggest that for the staff generally, that we could offer an extra day's leave. It would be a practical way of showing our gratitude, of indicating just how much we appreciate their hard work. So I'm going to leave that thought with you. Perhaps you could come in and tell us if it's feasible. I don't often just on the spur of the moment come up with something. And Councillor Crowley, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you do agree with me, it would be nice if we could do that cross-party. So I'll take those 3 questions, and then I have Councillor Garrett says 31 leaders. He obviously knows something I don't know. Someone must have declared UDI. So in the chat, Councillor Garrett is saying that 31 of the 33 leaders agree we move as one, which is interesting. I know some MPs have rebelled, but at the meeting we had at 5 o'clock this afternoon, where all 33 leaders were present, everyone agreed it was the right thing to do. So shall we take one each then? Dr. Chowdhury, then Mr. Simpson, and then the Chief Executive, if you could mull over my suggestion, please. Dr. Chowdhury.
Thank you, Chair. So on enhanced testing and tracing, so as we mentioned, I think we've got the testing bit right, and we're okay. We're in a reasonably good position. We have the new sites, and actually our numbers aren't low because we don't have access to testing relative to others, because our testing rates are higher than the London average. So that's a good bit of news. On the tracing bit, we like other boroughs put in to take part in the enhanced contact tracing scheme when it was first advertised a while back now. I think initially, I can't remember which boroughs across London, but there were 4 boroughs chosen initially by the department and PHE, and they were generally boroughs with very high infection rates at that time, and that made sense. I think since then we've kept on asking, and we've just had a pushback. There's a lack of capacity to bring others online, so we are asking. I was discussing this with South West London DSPHs today again, and everyone is at the same boat, waiting for a green light. So beyond kind of feeding that back, really, there seems to be a bit of a blockage in terms of capacity at the national end. I'm not quite sure what else there is to say. I'm sure there's willingness, but I think it's a capacity issue. I think that those were my two, weren't they? So I'll hand over to you, Richard.
Absolutely fine. And I recognise the capacity issue. I also know there's a problem with the labs, and I know I've been talking to you about that, Dr. Chowdhury, and some feedback I've had from people within the NHS about the fact that we're not utilising the various labs across London. And again, this afternoon, someone from the Ministry of Health and Social Care confirmed that 4 new labs are coming on board in London. So I'm glad to see that some of the lobbying that we've been doing is coming forward. So, shall we move over then to Mr. Simpson? So you were talking about the local administered payment scheme for isolating individuals?
Yeah, so the scheme was announced by the government on Monday, the 21st of September. But at that stage, it had some of the essence of the idea, but we didn't have the detailed guidance or the details about funding. So that came through in the week commencing the 28th. We had to have a system in place by today. So that was 3 weeks from the original announcement, but the details were fed out as the guidance was developed in between that. So it's the biggest challenge for the team was the IT solution, because we've got in place a web form that allows residents to do a fairly simple online form to answer the questions and provide the details to enable us to make a payment within 48 days of application, which we've done. And I suppose the biggest obstacle, which was solved at about 2 p.m. today, was the government had to provide us with access to the data from NHS Test and Trace. So when someone puts in their reference number, we can check that they have had a positive test or they've been asked to self-isolate, which is the first kind of pass and fail around receiving that. So we had our system live on Friday, which was 3 days ahead of the timescale. So because it's backdated by a couple of weeks, so people could start applying, but we couldn't actually start assessing them until this afternoon.
So when was the announcement actually made that this scheme should be put in place? Can we just give us a sense of the deadlines?
3 weeks ago.
And it was meant to be active by?
By today.
Right. Okay. I just think it's yet another indication of the pressure that local government generally, not just Sutton, but across the country, is being put under. It is obviously a very good idea, and obviously we're keen to make it work as quickly and as well as possible. Yeah. But some of the schemes that arrive from on high, I wonder if central government understands just how much work is involved to get them up and running, as you say, then when the hold up is that we haven't got the data. But luckily we got there in the end, so that's the important thing. Yeah. Ms. Bailey, do you want to come back on my suggestion? Councillor Crowley is saying that he thinks it's a good idea, but perhaps we'd like to talk outside of the meeting. My worry is that if we don't decide it today, then we'll have to wait much to the next meeting to make it happen. So do you want to talk about this idea that I've had and the governance around it?
Well, Chair, thank you. It's firstly, I think staff will appreciate your kind words, and the staffing awards, I think, were very much a celebration. Staff have been working, as you say, hard and long, have been flexible, have been redeployed, and we've done one staff survey. We're about to do another one quite soon, which showed that actually they were holding up remarkably well, as have our signance rates, and also, but just a little anxious about when to come back to the office, if at all. In terms of the extra day off, I've been doing a little bit of consulting with colleagues while you've been answering the previous questions, and I think that it's a decision which would have a cost to the council, but that is largely in terms of opportunity cost. And I'm sure that I can ask Emily Neese, our new head of HR, to put together a way of managing it that would maximise the benefit to staff and minimise the inconvenience and cost to the council. So with that in mind, Leader, I'm sure we can make this work, and I'm sure it would be a welcome gesture for staff. So thank you.
And just to understand, Ms. Bailey, is it something that we need to do as a recommendation tonight, or can we do it between meetings?
It would certainly be cleaner as a recommendation tonight, but you've expressed your enthusiasm for it, and I think that's helpful. Whatever you do,
thank you.
I'm trying to be helpful here. Yes.
I mean, I would like to see it cross-party, so let's have a ponder while we continue the discussion, Councillor Crowley. If you've got some concerns, happy for you to air them here, but I think it would be a natural consequence of our enthusiasm for the staff awards if we were able to show a material way of thanking our officers. But happy to have that conversation outside the meeting if you don't feel that you could endorse a recommendation this evening. Shall we go to questions from other councillors? Councillor Pennick, then Councillor Ramsey, and then Councillor McCoy.
Well, thank you, Ruth. And just on that last point about the annual leave, I would certainly support that. I'm conscious that when the pressure rises in an organisation, everybody works hard, the motivation goes on and so on. And I think we need to be aware of the well-being aspects of staff. I think we also need to make sure that staff are actually taking their annual leave. There's a tendency when these things happen for people to push it off a bit. And I think if there's a message that goes out, if we do agree an extra day, we should also have a message that says, can you please, discuss with your manager and make sure you take your leave, because people do need to make sure they have reasonable breaks. And these days it's difficult to do. That really wasn't what I meant to say. I'm quite concerned about the delay in implementing a locally enhanced tracing service and the fact that there's a lack of capacity at the centre to enable us to do that. I think we need to be pushing quite hard on that. It certainly seems to me to be the case over the last few months that the more that local councils have taken control of this and actually pushed ahead on some of these things, then the more has actually happened. And so I think that's something that we need to try and make sure happens as soon as we can. I was pleased to hear that the additional testing facilities are happening in the borough, but also that's being accompanied by more analysis in the labs, because it seemed to me there was a mismatch there, that testing is one thing, but unless the tests can be properly processed and analysed in laboratories, then we're not going to really make any progress. And test and trace seems to me to be the kind of the way out of this problem that we have. So I'm pleased to see the progress that's being made, but I do think that the local councils need to be given a little bit more control over the way they take these things forward, so that we can make sure that things happen as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Pennick. And I don't think I need to bring officers back in. Thank you for all those points. Councillor Ramsey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going slightly off the report, but it is COVID related. As we come into winter, naturally some of our services we see more demand for, so particularly waste over Christmas and street cleaning with leaf fall. Have we, and I know a lot of our contractors, their staff have been furloughed, given everything that's going on. So there are less staff around whilst demand for our services increase. Have we thought about that, or is there, I know it's very difficult, but is there sort of plan for the increased demand that we're going to see in winter, but less staff?
I think that's a really important point, Councillor Ramsey. Thank you for raising it. It's about the resilience of our staff. But as you say, as winter progresses and sadly COVID becomes more and more of a problem, I think it's a really important question. Ms. Bailey, do you want to take that question?
Happy to, Chair, and I'm conscious that Mr. Latham may wish to come in as well. I don't believe that any of our Veolia staff who do street cleaning and waste removal have actually been furloughed, so that service has continued throughout. We don't quite know what the winter will bring, so at the moment we're still being encouraged that if we want to meet people, it's safer to do so outside. So I'm not quite sure what that will mean for demands in services. You mentioned Christmas, Councillor Ramsey. I think none of us can quite predict how Christmas will pan out this year. So we will continue to watch the advice very carefully and keep in contact with our contractors. But so far, the levels of service have held up remarkably well on those particular services, I think.
Thank you. Now we'll bring in Mr. Latham, because Councillor Ramsey has certainly started me thinking leaf fall. As we know, the leaves fall in the autumn. So how are we going to cope with that? And potentially, if it snows, how are we going to cope with the gritting? Mr. Latham.
Well, the first thing to say, Chair, is the Chief Executive is absolutely correct. No staff in Veolia have been furloughed. In fact, as members be aware, they've continued to work throughout both lockdown and recovery, and now the emerging second wave. So whilst their absence rates may be a factor, and Councillor Ramsey is quite right to highlight that, we are going to be making the same planning arrangements for leaf clearance and snowfall if we have snow this winter as we would in other years. But it is right to register the fact there may be other factors such as absence rates which may have an impact.
Okay, sounds, I don't know, do we have a plan? Is there a programme?
We always begin at this time of year to plan for leaf clearance and gritting and snow clearance during the winter. There are no plans for Veolia to furlough any staff, so we're expecting all their staff who are well to continue to work through the winter period, through the autumn and winter period, I should say. We will be keeping close tabs, as we have done throughout the period of the pandemic crisis, on absence rates. There was a period early on in the lockdown when a number of ID Verdi staff who work in our parks and our open spaces and cemeteries were absent due to either their own illness or illness of members of their family. But thankfully, that position has not recurred since the early weeks of lockdown. So the reason I'm giving the committee the answer I am, Chair, is I think it's only right to be honest about the factors that may have an impact on the number of staff available. But we will be certainly discussing with them contingency planning in terms of agency alternatives.
Excellent, thank you. And I must say, feedback from residents is that the refuse collection, if anything, with fewer cars around, is working much better. The refuse trucks seem to be able to get up and down the roads a lot easier. So that is good news from that point of view. Councillor McCoy.
Thank you, Chair. I said I had 2 questions. Actually, the discussions have prompted a third, but hopefully they're not too long. My first question is about if we've picked up whether there's a general understanding amongst residents and businesses across the borough about the actual social distancing measures that are required of them at the moment, because they have changed as time's gone along, and I think seems to be a lot of confusion out there. But I'm wondering if we're picking up from our enforcement teams and that whether there is a good understanding amongst that. Related to that, my second question is, are any businesses not required to display a QR code? Because I'm seeing a few that aren't displaying a QR code that I thought might do, bigger businesses in particular. And then my third question relates to the £500 self-isolation payment that the council is just starting to administer, as Richard Simpson has been highlighting. I wondered, this is obviously an additional burden on the council in line with a lot of the other measures that the council's been asked to implement, particularly around payments of funding. Is any of the COVID funding we've been given as a council cover that? That's my 3 questions. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're asking, particularly that third question, Councillor McCoy, because the amount of administration and paperwork and feedback that we have to provide to central government for every small amount of money that comes our way is absolutely staggering. It seems to be generating a whole industry of its own. Mr. Simpson, do you want to come back on those questions?
Particularly the last one, Leader.
Yeah.
So yes, we have been given an allocation. I was just trying to look for the amount, Councillor McCoy. I think it's 20,000, but I can confirm the exact amount. So for administering the scheme, each council have been given the same amount of money, which I think is £20,000. But I will check. We also, obviously, the amount of payments we make, i.e. the programme costs, are covered by government. So however many £500 payments we make between now and the end of the scheme are covered by a grant from government.
Ms. Bailey?
So, Chair, thank you. Just to come back, I don't know if other colleagues want to, on the general enforcement. I mean, I think we've had colleagues out and about advising businesses. In terms of the QR code, I just double checked the website as you were talking. And although all businesses where people visit are encouraged to, The legal obligation is on hospitality businesses, tourism and leisure, and close contact hairdressers, manicurists, that sort of thing. And facilities provided by local authorities particularly. So if other businesses aren't, it may be that they are not absolutely required to, but it is certainly, as Councillor McCoy said, good practice, and we are encouraging everybody to do so. So if other councillors become aware of businesses that they believe should fit into those categories and should provide a code, and they aren't, do feel free to let our environmental services know, because that we can pick that up with them as we go about our business.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. And for the record, for the minutes, Mr. Simpson's confirmed that the admin grant for the scheme is 31,000. Councillor Garrett? Oh no, you changed your mind. Okay, fine. I'm not seeing anyone else indicating, so we need to go to the recommendations. Councillor Crowley, if you don't feel comfortable with putting this down as a recommendation, as a decision, perhaps we could do some wording around asking the council to consider the feasibility of offering every member of staff an extra day's leave. I'm just keen that that work happens rather than having to wait to the next meeting of S&R.
No, I understand that, Ruth, and Chair, sorry, and fair enough. I just feel a bit sort of not bounced into it. That's the wrong expression, but just sort of sprung on me tonight. You know, we were just discussing the fact that the government spring stuff on us, and all of a sudden this has been sprung on me a little bit. And whilst I agree with the sentiment involved in all of this, I also think that there are also policy implications and monetary implications for the council to think about. And whilst I would like to do it, it's like if I want to give all my guys at my company a day off, there is unfortunately a financial implication for me. And as long as we can get around that and make sure that, as Councillor McCoy said, the efficiency savings might well have gone up, and that might well be something that we can put against it. So therefore, it will mitigate whatever cost it might look like in the books. Then I have no problem with it. So theoretically, yes, I would go along with it. But I would, on that recommendation, say in theory, yes. But I would like to see a little bit more work to be done on that before we announce it to the staff, and take from that. There is one other question as well. I noticed with you were just chatting, the chief exec and Richard were talking about the enforcement activities with track and trace. Richard and Helen, would it be the case that if people do have to self-isolate, are we then going to be expected to knock on their doors? Is it going to be put to the council? Because I hear that the council might be, under the new COVID regulations, we might be getting more ability to do something like that. And I was just wondering where you see that falling at the moment, please. Thank you.
So, Chair, my understanding, and I can see that the Director of Public Health is keen to come in on this too, is that as things stand, we will endeavour to get hold of people that we are invited to trace, who will be those people who typically haven't proactively engaged with the website and haven't kind of responded to the sort of national stimuli in any way we can. Now, under current circumstances, knocking on their door will be an absolute last resort, because we don't want to put our own staff at risk, but it may be that in some cases that is the only sensible thing to do. But I imagine that will be in very few cases. There is also an issue, I think, of some regulations which are under consideration, which mention the words local authority and enforcement in the same sentence, but we are yet to be clear about what exactly that means in practice. And at the moment, our enforcement of people's need to isolate probably relates to encouragement of an active sort, rather than enforcement of any kind of physical sort, for which we are not geared up as an organisation, and only ever undertake enforcement action of that sort of more drastic nature, accompanied by police or other authorities under normal circumstances. Don't know, Imran, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just very quickly, if I may. So I think the key words are locally enhanced contact tracing. So at this stage, at least, all that is being proposed is that when this does come online, local council teams will be able to try to trace people who have had a positive COVID test. And then actually what they'll do, they'll link those people back in with the national database and the national system, and the national system will get in touch again. So actually it's It's very much an add-on and a kind of supplementation of the national system rather than a standalone local authority system.
Thank you. Councillor Hicks is asking who is the regulatory body?
Yes, I see the question. I'm not quite sure. So the regulations that I've seen in draft imply that local authorities will get authority from the Secretary of State to appoint certain people to enforce. But those are draft regulations, and we have not more than had them flashed across the front of our nose. Otherwise, when I refer to regulations, I'm talking about regulatory services. Oh, regulatory body in 5.3. Thank you very much, Councillor Hicks. So regulatory services are our environmental health, trading standards, licensing services, folk of that sort, who are checking out with businesses whether or not they're doing the things they're invited to do. Does that answer your question, Councillor Hicks? Thank you. Okay.
You must remember to unmute. There I go. You just thought I'd have learnt by now. Yeah. So we're going to move to the recommendations. I'm going to suggest, bearing in mind Councillor Crowley's comments, that we need to do a bit of thinking, a bit of work on my suggestion, that we do add a fourth recommendation, so 2.4, asking the council to consider the feasibility of offering members of staff an extra day's paid leave. And then on that basis, we can have a conversation outside of the meeting, and I can see on the chat that Councillor Crowley is happy with that. I really would, and I'm sure he would agree with me, I'd really like to show cross-party support for this, because I think we are all hugely grateful to our staff and the work that they're doing, the way they're coping with the crisis, both in their personal and their professional lives. So with that extra recommendation, can we agree recommendations 2.1 through to 2.4, please? Some nods, some agreed in the chat. Everyone's agreeing. Perfect. Thank you. So those recommendations are agreed with the extra recommendation. Before we move on, just to note that Councillor Sagib was having a few problems with his internet, but did join the meeting, so we have a full house. And also, Alexa Coates has pointed out to me that even though I have the words written in front of me, I failed to ask everyone if we can approve the minutes, which was very remiss of me. So can we approve the minutes as a correct record, please? The minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of September. And again, in the chat, lots of yeses and agreed. So thank you for that. And that brings us now to item 7. Ambitious for Sutton, having the right capacity to deliver. Councillor Gordon, would you like to say a few words first?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would first of all like to welcome Emily Neese to her first SNR meeting. She recently joined us as the Assistant Director of Human Resources, and she starts us off with this very welcome paper that shows how clear reporting structures going forward will enable the council to remain ambitious for Sutton and continue to serve our residents at no additional expense in these financially constrained times. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Am I handing over to you, Ms Bailey?
If that would be helpful, Chair. So. Yeah. Very much as Councillor Gordon has said, this continues a bit of work that we started thinking about earlier in the year, and also reflects the changes that have come into sharper focus over the time of the pandemic. So thinking about how we manage ourselves going forward, the thing that we have very much learned over the past few months is the importance of the role of the Director of Public Health and of health and wellbeing. And that's going to carry on being important to us and our community going forwards. We've also, with recent decisions and announcements, recognise the need to put real emphasis into the project to deliver the London Cancer Hub and to do our regeneration work. We're going to be under huge pressure as a city and as a borough to make sure that there are positive economic incentives for recovery, and that is Sutton's showcase. And additionally, we've had a number of rather key roles in the council filled over the last few months with colleagues who've been valuable and who've been great colleagues actually during the pandemic times, but who are with us on an interim rather than on a permanent basis. and for the stability and structure and security of all of us going forwards, I think we need to fill the right posts permanently. So having looked at that, we've taken a look at what the official makeup of our CMT is. And it is a tight little gathering of people who have, I think, held up remarkably well over the last few months. And what we have tried to do in putting this proposal together is to make sure that the structure that we will come out of this with is no more expensive, because this is not the time to be expanding it than it is going into it. And in order to do that, what we have done, as the report sets out, is to strengthen some of the roles, strengthen in particular the sort of leadership around wellbeing and public health, create a time-limited role to head up at the most senior level our regeneration activity, and there are some consequent changes to other people's reporting. I think the other element to bear in mind is what this also signals is a little bit of a rebalance between the sort of supporting centre of the organisation and those departments that are more frontline facing, and that altogether feels to me like the right approach under these circumstances. I think the report is, as I say, Emily has done a fantastic job for us here, and the report pretty much speaks for itself, but I'm very happy, and I'm sure she will be, to take any questions.
Thank you. And I don't know if you wanted to add something at this stage, Emily, or happy to take questions during the conversation. But as Councillor Gordon says, you are very welcome. You've joined us at a difficult time for the nation. And I know from feedback from many members of staff that you've absolutely hit the ground running. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Did you want to add anything at this stage?
Thank you, Leader. Just to take myself off mute, just to say that following the views of SNR committee and agreement tonight, then the council's policies and procedures would be followed to implement this structure, should it be agreed.
Thank you for that. And it's interesting, isn't it, that if you think back to March and April, we were very much focused on the day-to-day, thinking about how we could provide support to some of the most vulnerable people living in our borough, working out quickly new ways of working, working out how the vast majority of our staff will be working from home, and very much firefighting. I think, sadly, now is the time to think ahead. This is clearly not a crisis that's going to go away quickly until a vaccine is not only discovered but also is available for all of us. Then clearly we are living with COVID, and this is an expression that many people in the NHS are now using. They're not talking about recovering, they're talking about living with COVID. So clearly this is something that's going to be with us for months to come. And in any case, we know that we're in an economic recession. Some of that is being masked by COVID, and what the government is doing quite rightly to protect people who are on reduced incomes or indeed on no incomes at all. So we are clearly in an economic recession. It's a global recession, and that's going to have an impact on our residents for months and years to come. So I understand why we're thinking ahead like this, and I do think an emphasis on health and well-being for obvious reasons is absolutely vital. It's about people's physical health. It's about how we can provide support to the NHS to allow them to do their job. We know how much the hospital sector in particular relies on us to ensure that fewer people have to go into hospital. Of course, if they need to go, then they go. But the work that we're able to do in the community does mean that we're able to reduce the number of people having to go into hospital for acute care, but also means we can help get them out quicker when they're ready to be discharged. And that's good for everyone. It's good for society, it's good for their families, and it's good for themselves. But I'm also glad we're thinking ahead. Regeneration and growth was already something that we were, as one of our ambitions, that we were focusing on, and the huge amount of work on the London Cancer Hub, on the master planning of the High Street. I do think it's interesting, Councillor McCoy, thinking where we are now. When we started to talk about the future of the High Street, well over a year ago, possibly 2 years ago, and we talked about the High Street being a community hub, not just for retail, but also opportunities for entrepreneurs to set up startups, to use some of the space above the shops that's not being used at the moment, underutilised, to give people opportunities to work closer to home. There's a lot of conversations now about 15-minute cities, and people are wondering why, in order to earn a decent income, you have to stand, not sit, but stand on a very, very crowded train at 7 o'clock in the morning in order to get into central London. So in some respects, I think we were ahead of the times. We were thinking about the future of our borough, and I think the suggestions being put forward in this report are timely. In spite of the crisis and because of the crisis, I think we need to learn and think about how we adapt to what's happening in the world today. So that's enough from me. And Councillor McCoy, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Councillor Dombey. And yes, and to response to your points, I think it was even longer ago than 2 years, which that we've been talking about these things. Unfortunately, we're moving forward and we're in the process of trying to make those things happen. But my comments were about the restructuring, and to a large extent, this is an operational matter for decision by the chief executive and the leadership team about how they want to organise their staff. So that's absolutely fine, and I support the emphasis you're giving to those roles. But just one thing I wanted to pick up, which I thought was a very important point in 3.6, you talk about the one council approach, and that's something that I've been wax lyrical about in the past, that it's very important we have a one council approach. It's worked quite well in the past, particularly in sort of my portfolio area, bringing housing, planning and economic development together, and also working more closely with asset management, and that's seeing a lot of these positive things that Councillor Dombey refers to. And I just, the key thing here is that making sure that that one council approach continues, and it might, the leadership team might change around a bit, but as long as we're all working together and dealing with things as one council and we don't get siloed off, I think that's really important. One of the things that struck me is, we talked about an economic development plan a few years back, but that was actually what really underpinned that and helped us deliver it was our strategic planning and our local plan, and now our development management and implementing those planning. And again, the crossover has come about with the sustainable transport strategy that went to the ENN committee, I think last week, which is actually a planning document so that we can implement. So these are things that working as a whole council is important. But the other point I want to make is, having the senior leadership team, the right responsibilities and working together is important, but it's also, if we want to deliver on these ambitions, it's important we've got the sort of staff resourcing underneath that. I don't know, I think from what I'm hearing, the way we compare to other boroughs is our sort of teams for some of these key areas is quite low, quite under-resourced in terms of staff. And a lot of that is because we're a small borough and we have to work very hard on a small budget and make it stretch further. And we've got some fantastic staff that have been doing that job amazingly well. But it is worth just looking at making sure that we have got the resources in place to deliver on our ambitions. Thank you.
I think that's really important, Councillor McCoy. I'd say it was a lean team rather than understaffed, but it is a fact if I look at other boroughs and how many senior directors they have and also their pay scales. As Ms Bailey said, we are a small borough, but we have huge ambitions, and we need to have the right people in the right positions in order to fulfil those ambitions, because those ambitions are about the future of the lives of the residents living in this borough. The London Cancer Hub, you all know, is something I'm absolutely passionate about. It's an opportunity to provide thousands of new jobs, good quality, well-paid jobs in our borough. And I do think the conversation around 15-minute cities, I know it was born in Paris, and Paris is very different. They don't have the commuting scales that we have in our city. And yes, it is a very different city generally. But I do think all the work that we're all agreed that we should be pushing forward on climate change, the climate emergency, thinking about how we can offer more opportunities to people closer to the place where they live, within the borough where they live, has to be good from a climate emergency point of view as well, because it means that people are able to not only enjoy the place where they live, but also find ways of earning a decent income. So I'm quite taken by the idea of 15-minute cities. Obviously, we have to apply it to the London context, but I do think there are opportunities there. Councillor Drummond, you wanted to come in?
Yes, please. Hang on one moment. I'll put my camera on. There you go. Thank you. I've got two very quick questions, if that's okay. The first is 4.6, relating to what seems to be broadening out the monitoring officer's role, as he will be ensuring we're getting the best possible value and high quality service from the SLLP. Is there a suggestion there that we're currently not getting either good value or high quality advice? So that's my first question. My second question relates to 4.8, and it's the Environment Services Review, which is currently being undertaken by Ernst & Young. Now, I've no need to doubt that their recommendations will be robust and well thought out. However, it seems they're going to be, you're asking me to vote on recommendations I haven't seen to be implemented, which I feel fairly uncomfortable doing. So, I mean, is that what we're being asked to do? We haven't seen, well, the recommendations haven't even been given, and we're being asked to vote on them to be implemented. They're my two questions. Thank you.
That's fine, Councillor Drummond. I don't think that is quite right. Obviously, the review is important and will enable us to look at how we want to restructure a part of the council, but I'm not aware that that's going to have an impact on the proposals put in forward this evening. But I'll hand over to Ms Bailey for that point, and also for the monitoring officer point.
Yeah, so to take the 2 points, Councillor Drummond, in the order in which you raise them. So the issue about the monitoring officer's role is that we currently have, and this envisages we will continue to have, a legally qualified monitoring officer. That hasn't always been the case, and it isn't necessarily the requirement. So when we made the current appointment, part of what we asked him to do was to keep an eye on the way in which we cliented our relationship with SLLP. There is no sinister undertone to that. Merely that he is in the best possible position to advise us whether we continue to be organising ourselves to make best use of that, to get legal advice when we need it, and not to get it when we don't. But it is simply part of the role that we have enshrined in the current job description. On the second point, as the same paragraph also says, we do not anticipate anything that will be said by Ernst & Young changing the structure of the council at the level that we are asking councillors to approve it in this meeting. So in the same way that we have looked and made changes around the organisation of finance and HR services, which have taken place at I don't like to say lower level in the organisation, but at a more operational level in the organisation, we have signalled here that we do not anticipate that any proposals from Ernst & Young would change the structure at CMT level.
Fine, I understand you don't anticipate it, but I am being asked to vote on recommendations that I haven't seen.
No, you are not. Well, so sorry, I don't wish to contradict you. You're being asked.
Well, it says there, recommendations will be implemented complementary to reshaping of the council, and I haven't seen them.
No, what we are required to ask you, I think, Councillor Drummond, is whether or not you are supportive as a committee of the senior director level issues. We are undertaking in this report that they will not be impacted by what is said by Ernst & Young. So we're not, on that point, no, I don't think we are asking you to vote on those. If they do make a change to what we've been doing at this level, then obviously we'd have to bring them back to the committee.
So, Councillor Drummond, none of us have seen any recommendations. We're all in exactly the same position, and we're being asked to approve, if we do, the changes laid out in the report. If there are any further changes as a result of the review, then obviously we'll have to discuss it again. But there is nothing that I mean, as I say, I haven't seen the review, so I don't know either. We're being asked to agree what is laid out in this report and nothing more, and I hope that addresses that concern. Councillor Pennick.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment on passing. I very much appreciated the advice of the interim monitoring officer, and very much support the idea of having a senior legal advisor in the council as well as a shared legal service. I think it's actually worked very well over the last few months. I wanted to say simply that organisational structures always have to evolve, and they need to focus on what are the issues of the day, and I'm pleased to see that this new structure is doing that. And I think we just need to be aware of the fact that organisational structures are never set in stone. We do have to look at them from time to time. But it's also important, I think, and this picks up, I think, Councillor McCoy's point, it's important to be aware of kind of cross-cutting things and to get people to work across organizational structures too, and not to get people to be too much kind of fixed into particular organizational groups. And we've made progress on that, I think, over the last few years, but there is still more to be done. So I would urge Helen Bailey particularly to kind of pay some address to that over the coming years. The question I've got really, I've had an interest in libraries, arts and culture over the last few years, and part of the wellbeing division, and pleased to see that's going into public health. I think that works pretty well, but I'd be concerned if, given the current issues in public health, if that were to dilute Imran Chowdhury's responsibilities and cause him too much stretch over too many areas, and would just like I think some reassurance from the chief executive that we're not stretching him too far in some of these areas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Pennick. I think I can give you that reassurance. I don't want to spare. I want to spare Dr. Chowdhury's blushes. I think one of the things with those cultural services is that they need to, and I think your 2 points are complementary, Councillor Pennick. Those cultural services, they contribute to everything we do. They contribute to the success of our regeneration effort. They contribute to our health and wellbeing effort. And they're also part of what we provide to neighbourhoods and to communities. So I think this proposal also thinks about the management structures and the support that there are in those at the moment. And I think that what we have suggested here will deliver and will ensure that those services work across the council. As you've said, structures do evolve and will evolve, so we will continue to watch that and make sure that we don't overload any individual or any part of the council. And picking up your earlier point, which I thoroughly agree with, I mean, I have been, and I would like to say this publicly, I have been impressed at the way in which the team has come together in crisis, and we have worked as one council across the various services. And I very much hope and believe that that will continue as we go forward. But thank you for your thought about that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Crowley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Executive. I've got a couple of comments really, and then I'm going to give an explanation on our group's position, if that's all right with you. I noted with a smile on my face that you referred back to Paris again, Chair. I noted that the lead member for ENN in his previous outing, I think at SNR, it might be at ENN, referred to Paris in quite a long way. I mean, I wonder if we're going to end up with something like the Sutton Commune that might end up with us sort of spreading out into a more sort of agrarian type of basis within the borough. The other thing that
first time I've heard the city of Paris being referred to as agrarian, but okay.
Well, it was at one point. It was at one point, wasn't it? It might go back that way. Who knows? The other thing that is incredibly not frustrating, it just makes me want to scream when I keep looking at every single paper, is got this sort of, it starts to mean nothing when we keep saying ambitious for something, ambitious, 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 ambitious. What does that actually mean at the end of the day? Nobody has spelled out to me what that means. I know Tony Newman, who's had to resign tonight from the head of Croydon Council, the leader of Croydon Council, had at the bottom of his Twitter account, #ambitious for Croydon. And look what's happened to him. And I'm a bit concerned that if you say this word too many times, it means nothing. It starts to mean absolutely nothing. It's just a word that's stuck out there that our staff have to put into papers because they've been instructed to do so. And I'd be interested to know your thoughts, Chair, on just using this word ambitious the whole time, because it really does lose its meaning, and it just means a variety of things to a variety of people on different levels. And so I don't really understand where that's coming from. With regards to the paper itself, yeah, it's a nicely put out argument. We accept that, and we accept that, but we've not once been consulted on this paper all the way through. We've not once had a briefing on this paper. We have had on other things, but not on this paper. As such, we believe it's the administration and the officer cadre of the council's paper, and we will be abstaining on this, not because we don't necessarily agree with it, but it isn't anything to do with us. It's to do with the administration and the officers and the way that they're working together and the way that they're trying to implement your ideology and your philosophy and your manifesto. So there, from our point of view, we will be abstaining on it, and they are our reasons. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crowley, and thank you for referring to our philosophy and our vision. I'm surprised you don't know what the tag of ambitious stands for. All you need to do is to look at the corporate plan and to look at various reports coming to our various committees to see exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about the future of our borough. We're talking about the future of the lives of the people living here. This was something that we felt strongly pre-COVID, but I would argue with the COVID crisis, it's even more important. Some of what we do is the basic statutory services to make sure that we oil the machinery and get the job done. And that's the street lights, that's the fixing the potholes, that's the picking up the rubbish and cutting the grass verges. But the role of local government is so much more than that, Councillor Crowley. It's about having a real impact on the lives of the people living in this borough. It's recognising that as an outer London borough, we have so much to offer, and that if we are able to offer opportunities to people, whether or not they're struggling, so I'm talking about people with physical disabilities, people who are struggling with their mental health, children with special needs, but also for people who aren't struggling with those particular issues, but aren't able to access some of the well-paid jobs and the positive opportunities that are available to other people. It's why, as a party, we've always put so much emphasis on education, and it is no accident that we have some of the best schools in the country. I'm not talking about grammar schools, obviously, they are part of our makeup of our schools in our borough, but our non-grammar schools, our non-selective schools are some of the best in the country. So it's about opportunity and it's about ambition for the future. And if you'd like an example, I'd go back to the London Cancer Hub, because having a piece of national infrastructure in our borough, bringing together the ambitions of two organisations which are world famous, the Royal Marsden and the Institute of Cancer Research, providing opportunities for them not only to fulfil their own ambitions for cancer treatment and cancer diagnosis and new cancer drugs, but to do it in a way that offers opportunities to the residents of this borough. Building a school on that site is, for me, the epitome of the ambition of our borough, because what we're saying to our youngsters is, and especially now with the COVID crisis and economic recession, there are opportunities if you live and grow up in this borough. There are opportunities for you to live a good life. There are opportunities for you to get support when you need it for your physical and your mental health. There are opportunities for us to give you support when you most need it, but also to give you the opportunity to thrive and to fly and to be successful. And for me, ambitious is a really important word. We've been accused in the past, Councillor Crowley, of being too modest about some of our achievements. I do think it's time that we speak up loudly and talk about the opportunities that are available in this borough. We talk about Opportunity Sutton and we talk about being ambitious. And you know better than me, sometimes to get a message across, you have to repeat it more than once. So although it may strike us, because we read all the council reports so avidly, that the word is used a lot, I think it will take some time before some of these messages are really reinforced with our residents. So I'm very comfortable continuing to use this word and continue to reinforce the message that Sutton is the most wonderful borough to live, to work and to bring up a family. Do you want to come back in, Councillor Crowley?
Yeah, I will, because I know where you got the ambitious word from, and that was from the peer review about 4 years ago, if I remember rightly, when they came in and they said that we weren't ambitious enough. But then to take that word and to actually almost stick it to every single paragraph seems to me to be somewhat self-defeating. You talk about the Cancer Hub. We didn't even get an investment partner with the Cancer Hub. I'm ambitious for the Cancer Hub. I want it to work. But to say you're ambitious, with ambition, there has to come targets, where we are, where we're going to get to. And unfortunately, I think that those two things are being merged slightly. I think we're losing the definition of what ambition is. The word ambitious can just be thrown out there like confetti, a bit like, car data numbers, if you want me to put out something else out there. That is something that I think we need to be careful about. And if we're truly ambitious for this borough, we need to treasure that word and we need to use it properly. So that's all I would say on that, Chair. I understand where you're coming from, but I think you've got to understand where I'm coming from as well on this. As a group, we certainly support a lot of the ambitious things for Sutton, but what we are saying is that you just seem to be putting it out there in every single report, and I don't think that the officers necessarily understand what that word really means. Thank you.
And I hear what you say, Councillor Crowley, and you're entitled to your opinion. But if we go back to the London Cancer Hub, the school exists, it has been built, the children are there, the young people are there.
That's the school.
And it was the first passive house school to be built in the country. That's an indication of the scale of our ambition. It is a fact that the London Cancer Hub already exists. The Marsden and the Institute of Cancer Research are already working on the site. The Centre for Drug Discovery is built, and the Institute of Cancer Research continues to discover new drugs. So what we're doing is enhancing work that is already in place, and I personally feel that that is a real sense of the scale of our ambition. But you and I could carry on this dialogue for some time, and we'll agree to differ. So I understand that the opposition group have decided to abstain on this recommendation. So I'm going to put now up the recommendation. Oh no, I see that Councillor Garrett wants to come in and ask a question. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but since everybody's getting themselves very worked up about the Cancer Hub in the ward that I represent, I would just like to point out the school, about which you're being so proud, was a year late. And even after the school was there, children had to cross a dangerous road because you were a year late putting in the zebra crossings, which seems like quite a basic provision, but you weren't ambitious enough to get those in on time. And June 2014, the first committee meeting I ever sat on as a councillor, you were there telling us about your ambitions for the Cancer Hub and the importance of sorting out the transport strategy. And here we are in October 2020, and there is still no transport strategy. So I'm just not quite sure how constantly talking about ambition connects with the lack of reality in some quite basic things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett, and I'm sure that the teaching staff and the students at the Harris Academy in Belmont will be very disappointed to hear that you're not willing to endorse the fact that we have a most fantastic school in our borough, working closely with the Institute of Cancer Research to provide the best.
They would like to have a crossing so they can get to that fantastic building safely. Leader.
And I agree with you that there is work still to be done. Absolutely agree with you. Just because you're ambitious doesn't mean that you're complacent. There's still a lot to be done, and there's a lot that we will do. But that doesn't mean that you can't be proud of what we've achieved and proud of the residents living in the borough and the great work that they're doing. We're going to the recommendation. We have one recommendation to change the organisational structure of the council as detailed in this report to support the delivery of our Ambitious for Sutton programme. The opposition group are abstaining. Can I ask everyone else please to indicate their support? And I can see that is happening. Both opposition groups are abstaining, but we have a majority in favour, so that recommendation is passed. Thank you very much. That brings us now to item 8, Equalities Workforce Report and Human Resources and Organisational Development Strategy. Councillor Gordon, over to you again.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would just like to let the members know that this is an important roadmap upon which Sutton Council's successful change and performance is based. It charts the direction and vision for Sutton employees who are an important part of realising this strategy. So over to, I think this time I'm right, to Emily Nice, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. This report, which covers the Equalities Workforce Report and the Human Resources and OD Strategy, gives an overview of the equalities indicators across each of the equalities characteristics. The details set out at 3.1 to 3.9, and all of those characteristics are broadly improving, although there is always more work for us to do, and we are focused on doing that. In particular, our work over the last few months and over the next few months is focused on ethnicity following the Black Lives Matters events over the summer. And in response to this, an action plan has been developed with our BAME network, which includes mandatory learning for staff and managers around equalities and unconscious bias, supporting our managers in challenging poor behaviours and actively hearing from our staff. There's more detail around this in the report and also the equalities data at Appendix A. And this information has been used as an evidence base alongside our council-wide staff pulse survey, which was undertaken in July, and also from hearing from our staff networks trade unions and colleagues across the council to shape the HR and OD strategy, which forms Appendix B, which accompanies this report. This strategy builds on previous draft strategies to support the delivery of our Ambitious for Sutton programme, and is shaped across 6 main themes: a culture that promotes pride in Sutton, promoting our new ways of working, strategic resourcing and workforce planning, diversity and inclusion, being a learning organisation, and our people management. These themes will be underpinned by supporting our staff through new ways of working, something which has become part of our daily lives in response to COVID, and also really promoting a focus on wellbeing and engagement to continue to support our staff in delivering high quality services to residents. Following this committee agreeing this strategy, this will be formed into a programme of work which we will deliver over the next 3 years, and we will also take the report, which in the nature of its format is quite formal, and we will put it in a simpler and more accessible format for staff.
Thank you, Emily. And I know a lot of work has been going on to check in with staff, particularly when they're working from home. You lose that everyday human contact. So to check that they're all right with the various pulse surveys. Do you want to give us a sense of how people are coping? I know that working from home for some people has its advantages. It gets rid of a very long commute, but it also raises all sorts of other problems. Do you want to just give us a sense of where people are, how people are coping? Is there a feeling that people would like to get back in the office? How are we dealing with all those various COVID-related issues?
We used an independent research company to carry out our last pulse survey so that staff could be completely open and honest. And the findings overall were very positive. Hive, the external company we used, said that any score over 7 out of 10 they deemed to be good. And the highest scores were around staff feeling that they were connected to their managers, that they were enabled and empowered to undertake their roles, and that they were clear about the work that they were undertaking, and also that they understood the work that the council was doing to support residents through COVID. And all of those scores were between 8.2 and 9 out of 10. The lower end of good was between 7.2 and 7.3, and that was around staff wellbeing and staff feeling that they had a good work-life balance during COVID. And that's why that's one of the elements that we've been focusing on over the last few months. The only indicator that we had, which came out as less than good in the survey, was around staff looking forward to returning to the office, which is perhaps unsurprising at this time. And so we undertook some further work with a working group with staff representatives and our staff networks to do a little bit of work to unpick that. We identified that some of the concerns were around travelling into the office, personal concerns around contracting COVID or having vulnerable family members. We're about to launch tomorrow our second pulse survey, and we've really broadened out some of the questions around wellbeing and concerns around returning to the office, as well as asking all of our staff specifically their views on race and how well we treat diversity and inclusion within the council, which, as I mentioned in my presentation, is one of the key areas of focus as well.
And again, I'm really glad that we're focusing on that. There's been some staff events. I know that the staff Black and Asian Minority Ethnic Forum has been reinvigorated, and a lot of people are coming forward to speak quite openly about what it feels like to work in this borough, and in many cases to live in this borough as well. And I think we're learning a lot from listening about maybe things weren't quite as we imagined, things weren't quite as good as we thought, and we're going to have to think about how we recognise that. I am struck, and I think I'll refer this to Ms Bailey, that if I think about our council group, I would say that, you know, of course we can do better, of course we can do more, but it is pretty representative of our community. And I think I appreciate it's not easy, there is no magic wand, but I do think that our staff workforce, and particularly our senior management, needs to look and sound and be more reflective of the community that we're working in. I know there are no easy answers, and I know that between yourselves, Richard Simpson, Emily and others, we're doing a lot of work to think about how we can remove some of the barriers that possibly we weren't aware of, but to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to work for the council and to do well and to progress with their career. But it does strike me that our council group is a lot more diverse, certainly than our senior management, and I think that's something we need to go away and have a think about. So we have a question from Councillor James and then a question from Councillor Drummond. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emily, for the report. So just a quick question first before I comment. On 4.7, where we talk about disability, does that include learning disabilities?
It does, yes.
Okay, so thanks for that. And then just on the Black Lives Matter, so I really welcome about the new recruitment system and the language that's going to be used and all the new things that will be put in place. But one of the things that strikes me is if I was somebody looking to move into the borough and I was doing a little bit of research and I looked at our website, there's nothing really on our website, either in a written statement or visually, tells me that Sutton welcomes a diverse workforce. And I just wonder if that's something that we could look at in the future, whether it's a written statement or something visual. I think that would be something that would be really beneficial to really showcase what kind of a workforce we do have in Sutton. Thank you.
I think that's a really good idea, Councillor James. I know that in the pack that goes out when people apply for jobs, it talks about our pride values, and obviously within that we talk about diversity. But I do think you're right, on the website we could do with some stronger statements in a place that people can see quite quickly and easily. So I think that's a really good idea. I'm going to suggest that Emily takes that away and has a think about how we can make that happen. Thank you for that. Councillor Drummond.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emily, for the reports. Much appreciated. I just want to touch on 4.7 as well. I see the disability workforce figure is at 4.5%, which sadly hasn't moved on from last year, albeit we have got the Disability Confident Committed. So at the risk of upsetting people, I'm sure we'll be ambitious to move that on. My question, though, is around the third that aren't answering it, which I know you say could be a reason. What plans have we got in place to encourage people to sort of answer it and because it's all very well saying, you know, we realise it could be an issue there. Have you got anything in place? I mean, how do we do it? Because if 16% are saying they prefer not to say, and we're an inclusive council, why don't they want to say? Is my concern.
So I'll hand over to Emily. I just said there's nothing upsetting about being ambitious, Councillor Drummond. It's actually a good thing.
I didn't say it wasn't, Chair. I didn't say it wasn't. But used in the right way.
Absolutely agree with you. Emily.
Thank you, Leader. We've sent out a message, in fact, only today, to encourage all of our staff to complete their equalities information on our HR systems, and we will continue to do that. And I know, for example, that Nick Ireland, the Strategic Director of People Services, sent out a personal message for his department to encourage them to do that, and we'll be rolling that out and asking staff to disclose their information so that we have more comprehensive reporting. Staff do have the opportunity, if they don't want to say, to specify that they'd rather not state. So what we want to do is move away, is to make people feel comfortable in disclosing their status, but also move away from just not knowing and making it clear that we welcome and we support having the information. And we've also been working with our staff networks who are very supportive of us trying to increase the declaration figures, and are going out to work with their members to ask them to actively update their information as well.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I do think it's an important question, Councillor Drummond. I'm wondering, Emily, do you think it's fear of stigma? Do you think it's because possibly they have a condition they're not sure if it counts as a disability? Are you able to sort of get under the skin of it a little bit and try and understand why it is that people don't feel comfortable declaring?
I think that there are barriers in terms of people feeling that they want to log into the IT system and update their information, and sometimes it can be a logistical issue. Disability in particular as the equalities characteristic is one that can change, and that people can change throughout their lifetime, and there is a differential in some people's lives. That at different points they may feel more disabled or less disabled depending on an illness that they have, which may change. And equally, disability can be subjective in terms of people's views, and I've worked with colleagues who have had what one might more classically describe as a disability, and they've chosen not to declare themselves as disabled because they would prefer to see themselves as able to carry out their roles. And I think that this is something that we will continue to work with the staff network, who are very, very keen that we do encourage people to complete this characteristic in particular.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Councillor McCoy.
Thank you. I just want to raise something in relation to 4.9, which the issue of age, particularly young people, and the council's taking on of apprentices. And I think that's it's very good. We should lead by example. I'm glad we have been meeting our targets in the past, and I know that we've had some very, very good apprentices over the years. I know some of those have gone on to have full-time jobs at the council and very much enjoyed that, and they've made a valuable contribution to the work of the council. There's been some in teams that I'm very aware of. But I wondered if there's any data that around, how many we do go on to permanent jobs, because that's the key thing. That's what we want to do, take them on to full-time roles. I'd be quite interested. And also, of course, apprentices can be, we can take on older people as well. But I say it's good to bring on young people and have them working and being part of the organisation.
Emily?
I do have the retention rate figures, but I don't have them to hand. So if you wouldn't mind, Leader, if I could make arrangements to have them sent out with the minutes.
That's absolutely fine, thank you. I think Councillor McCoy is absolutely right. It's good to offer apprenticeships, but it's also good to understand the outcome, and if it led then to a job either within the council or somewhere else. I know it's a real opportunity for many people. So thank you for raising that. Councillor Ramsey.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's just a point of clarification for myself, really. On 4.3, on the gender pay gap, there's a 9.3% gender pay gap in favour of men. Is that because women are getting paid less than a male doing the same job? And then if so, that would seem easy to fix, but I assume not. And is it the case that obviously there are men that are in kind of higher tier roles?
It is the latter, yes. That okay. Absolutely. The former would be equal pay. The gender pay gap is that there are more senior officers who are male.
And that's what we need to tackle.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely right. Okay, and that's the importance of a report like this, because it does help us to focus on the things that we need to improve. Yes, I was just thinking, Ms. Bailey, if it wasn't for you, it would be far worse, wouldn't it? So at least we've got something that evens it up slightly, but clearly we need to do a lot more. It's interesting because I know that when we had Jessica Crow and Mary Morrissey in senior positions, obviously the gender gap was very different. So some of this is about where we find ourselves, but that doesn't mean it's not important, and it doesn't mean we should think about how we can do things differently. I don't see anyone else indicating, so I suggest we go to the recommendations. Can we agree recommendation 2.1 and 2.2? And lots of agreed. Excellent. That's cross-party agreement. Thank you, Emily, for all the work that you've done on that. Much appreciated. And so we come to the final item on the agenda, agenda item 9, on our asset strategy. And Councillor Gordon, you're having a busy evening. Over to you again.
Thank you very much, Chair. Now, I think Mark is going to present this. Mark Norrell, again, his first outing at SNR. So welcome, Mark. And this asset management strategy shows how property can assist with the delivery of policy objectives and how it supports the medium-term financial plan during these times of ever-reducing central government funding. In Sutton, we are proud to work with our partners, and this strategy further underpins our work with services throughout the council. Chair, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. And Mark, are you leading on this, or is it Mr. Simpson? Who wants to start us off?
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Gordon. I'll start, if that's okay, if I may. And then I will bring Richard on around Appendix B, in particular around the investment property portfolio.
That's fine, thank you.
So thank you, Leader. So the report sets out the proposed new asset strategy found in Appendix B. And the report also provides an update on the delivery of the investment property portfolio over the last financial year, which Richard will pick up in due course as well. I'm going to focus on Appendix A and the asset strategy in itself. This strategy builds on the outcomes already achieved from the previous plan. And this strategy aims to take a slightly different approach and starts to draw and connect together all the relevant property related strategies and work streams to ensure that not only does this raise awareness throughout the council, but it recognises the importance of property-based decision making isn't taken in isolation, and it should be part of a wider coordinated process, so that in effect it optimises the council's asset portfolio and really just genuinely assist in the delivery of services. So the strategy aims to summarise and highlights what we need to do to best manage and transform our assets and keep pace with change. So a number of the other agenda items that we've heard tonight, actually picking up on some key words about adaptability, flexibility, resilience. This strategy aims to set out a number of those aspects, and obviously does take into effect the impact of the pandemic and its implications on property. And what the strategy does deliver is a set of key objectives for us that supports the corporate plan and the ambitions for Sutton. It sets out how our assets need to become fit for purpose, meet service requirements and also that of our workforce, and so that it also makes sure that those assets are compliant with all the legal and regulatory legislation that's in place. They need to be economical and obviously where necessary deliver those financial returns. They need to support place regeneration where we need it to. We've mentioned earlier on around environmentally sustainable. It needs to connect to that agenda. It is very important that we do so in the emerging work around the climate emergency and the environmental strategy. And our assets also need to be flexible and available for shared use so that we start connecting with our partners and our key stakeholders. So I'm going to now focus a little bit about shaping those priorities and then to talk a bit about some of those key work streams that are emerged from this strategy. And obviously since the outbreak of COVID-19, the words flexibility, adaptability, resilience are primary drivers. And obviously in the financial context, you know, with potentially increasing operating costs from a property perspective and also increased premises safety standards. You know, we're in a different and emerging world in terms of our assets, and we need to adopt new and efficient and effective ways of working and be smarter in how we work to manage our property and still build on and improve opportunities to collaborate, not just internally, but also externally with our partners and our community sector, and obviously the voluntary sector too. So the strategy itself also then sets out almost a one council approach to ensure that our property works corporately and achieves what it needs to achieve. And I'm going to focus on some of those key areas because property data will be one of those areas where we need to ensure that we have the right data that facilitates the right to support decision making. In particular, now when we're in the forefront of an emerging economy, recession, and obviously the outputs to the pandemic. So the first one in section 7 is in relation to the London Cancer Hub. I'm not going to dwell on each of these in detail, but just to say that obviously is a key driver and a priority for us to make sure that we deliver that. And obviously the refurbishment of Cumbrian House is a good example to provide that necessary incubator space. The climate emergency and environmental strategy assets will play a very big part in helping achieve what we want to achieve as a council, which is the commitment to be London's most sustainable borough. So we need to set that out in the context of our assets to make sure that they are operating from an environmental perspective, but it's also a bit about how we procure our services around property. So for example, one of our current partners has one of the largest fleet vehicles in the UK. So, it's important that we work with our existing partners to make sure that we're promoting sustainable travel, electric vehicles and the like. And also to make sure that our utility procurements and any future energy purchasing that we undertake, we are setting those at green tariffs, and that our electricity supply, as another example, is from 100% renewable sources. What we also want to do is to make sure that our housing, estate regeneration, our people's services are connected into this. So it's extremely important that our service asset plans underpin the way that we work so that we connect the priorities and emerging work of our services linked to asset requirements so that we can start to shape what those requirements are and build that capacity within that way of working. So basically that means that we embed asset plans into service thinking that will help shape service priorities, improvements, ways of working, and to future profile the asset demand piece. Linked to that as well is obviously connected to town centre and our commitment to ensuring our high street functions as a high street and our amenities and public realm across the borough do so too. So our commitment there is to make sure that the assets that we hold work for us in a way that actually we can help deliver the future high street work, the future high street fund, and the emerging work coming out of that work stream. And one important factor for me here is the way that we work collaboratively with our partners. And one thing I would like to achieve and ensure that does happen is that we explore those future opportunities with, for example, our NHS colleagues to enable perhaps some of that way of working to be brought into the high street and all the added benefits that will bring. Linked to that, and moving into the next section, is the place-based piece of work, which is about how our assets will support any emerging place work. So this is also about thinking about how our assets can support potential options for further outreach work and co-location, not just on our own assets, but also in that of our partners, and working closer so that any emerging work really is based on that locality approach and that our assets underpin that so that those outputs are delivered. That also connects back to the way that we work. So linking back to our medium-term financial plan and some of the service transformation work is that COVID-19 has taught us a lot about how we can work differently. So what we need to be doing is to make sure that our workforce and our assets are connected along with our digital and IT provision so that we support that agenda. And that could be simple things like tangible asset-based solutions such as touchdown spaces for our officers to work in and touch down and be able to undertake work. And also that of our partners and to look at further collaboration opportunities around asset use. And then we've obviously got the important part of our investment and regeneration property portfolio. So we will continue to manage that in line with our current policy framework that sets out the objectives and service and strategic priorities around that. And we will continue to monitor those key property performance indicators that are set out actually in Appendix B. of which I will bring Richard in a moment. There is also a really important piece around our data, and our property performance review will highlight to us where we need further utilisation data and service suitability work, so that we can start mapping out a detailed operational asset management plan that schedules out and starts connecting condition, maintenance work, so that we can truly strategically invest in the buildings that we need to invest in. So that will create a baseline of data for us to identify future investment or disinvestment work, and also bring together an evaluation matrix so that we can use this for our tangible decision making, in particular around funding. And in the current economic climate, that's really important. And that will also cover.
So all of this is very important. Bear in mind, we've read the report. So if you just want to sum up with the last two sections, and then I'll bring in Mr. Simpson, if that's all right.
Certainly, Leader. So last section is around the corporate landlord model, which is a way how we need to work more strategically that connects that, so we're truly corporate and we're able to then deliver some of those key priorities that are set out in the strategy. And that's around collaboration and making sure that we work across all services to deliver what we need to deliver. And that will also link back to any future FM procurement opportunities and provide greater oversight around statutory compliance and decision making. And I'll hand over to Richard for Appendix B. Thank you, Leader.
Perfect. And obviously there's a lot to say in the report, because it is a lot of work's gone into it, and it covers an awful lot of what we do. What I particularly like is the way that you've linked it up to our corporate priorities. And I think you've done that very effectively. So thank you. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mark. So just a few words for the committee on our investment property portfolio, which is just one element of the asset strategy, as Mark's discussed. So this report talks about performance in the year to March the 31st, 2020, but I'll say something about the last 6 months as well. So 4 years of performance are outlined in the paper. So net income growth for every one of those 4 years. Net income growth for 1920 is 2.62%. So by net income growth, that is the income after the costs of financing and repaying the debt. So also in 1920, there was 2 purchases which increased our kind of sector base. So gave us a more balanced portfolio. So there was a leisure and an industrial purchase in 1920. So the total net income in 1920 is £3.4 million. So just to put that in context, I suppose, for the committee, if we didn't have that £3.4 million in order to set a balanced budget in 2019-20, we would either have to increase income from other sources by 3.4 million. And I think you would all find it hard to come up with those options. Or we would have to reduce expenditure and cut services to residents by 3.4 million pounds. If you were thinking about how many council jobs would that be, you might be thinking about in the region of 100 jobs at an average wage in the council. So I'm just trying to get across the significant contribution this makes to the council's medium-term financial plan and our annual budget. So as Mark said, the asset strategy keeps the same principles around decision-making and governance on the IPP as have served us well over the last few years. So it's clearly difficult market conditions for anyone who's invested in property at the moment in 2020-21. The challenging conditions, and as reported to the last meeting of SNR when we looked at the budget position, we are expecting a reduction in that income during this year. At the moment, that reduction we're expecting to be around £750,000. So if you go back to that 3.4 million, when you look at it in a budget paper, it looks like a shortfall. If you look at it in the context of contribution, instead of 3.4 million, you're saying, oh, it only gives us 2.6 million. So that's disappointing, but that's part of the risk, I suppose, of having invested in property. But that's still making a contribution to other services in the council. We're also expecting some deferrals in this year. So we've had some partners in our properties who've asked to, instead of paying all their rent in this year, for example, they had a 3-month break in terms of when we were in that part of lockdown, and then they're going to pay 15 months in next year and 9 months in this year. So that just catches up over a 2-year period. And we've clearly tried to work with all our clients, and Mark and his team have been working with them all in terms of a reasonableness as a landlord, I suppose. And also at the current stage, we don't have any teeth, I suppose, which is part of the arrangements government have put in place to protect, quite rightly, those in these properties. But we couldn't enforce, even if we didn't have a tenant who wasn't paying. But all our tenants have been actively engaging with us. So that's what I want to get across as well. So part of the recommendation is also to bring, given those challenging conditions in year, I think it's only appropriate that we bring another update to the committee at the April meeting of SNR. And we would normally wait a year between formal reporting. Obviously, as officers, we're looking at this on a daily basis, but we think it's important to report again in April 21. So the committee gets a real feel for the issues and the challenges in this year and looking ahead to next year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Mark, for all the work that you've done on this. As I said before, it's interesting to see how it connects so directly with all our various priorities. And I think you're absolutely right, Richard, to suggest that we bring it back in April, because if the world is changing quickly from one month to the next, let's hope that by the time we get to April, we've at least got some clarity. If nothing else, we'll have had a budget. We might even know what our funding settlement is. So yeah, anything's possible. I do agree with you about the investment property portfolio. I think it has held up well. I think that the criteria that we put in were absolutely robust, but I'm also pleased to see that we're updating it on a regular basis, because the world is changing beyond recognition, and it's important that we stay abreast of all of that. So thank you for that. I've got Councillor McCoy and then Councillor Garrett. Councillor McCoy.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mark and Richard, for your presentation. Mr. Norrell, you made me very happy because you opened with talking about the one council approach. Obviously, from what I said earlier, that's something that's very close to my heart. And your report and your presentation set out very clearly how the asset management strategy can help support that across the council. So I'm delighted with your report. I just wanted to flag up another couple of ways that the asset management portfolio actually can help towards the ambitions of the council. First of all, is our property ownership is quite helpful, I think, in light of the some of the proposals in the upcoming planning white paper, future of planning white paper. We'll be discussing that at the Housing Economy and Business Committee tomorrow, because there's some concerns about that, about taking away some of the controls and powers we have over our built environment and the changes to it. But by actually owning key assets and key properties within, for example, the town centre, but not just with the town centre, it means that we actually can control what's delivered there. That's both in terms of businesses and the offer to businesses, but also it's the built thing. And one thing I've always insisted is where the council is doing, or managing some development or funding development, we do make sure we do go for very high standards. And I'm very pleased we did it with our council housing. But also any of our properties, that's the kind of thing we want to aspire to. And the second area where I think it's also been quite useful, Mr. Simpson, you touched on this, is our flexibility around rents of our, tenants of our council properties, trying to sort of reduce the burden and renegotiate with them. And I know you have helped a number of businesses with that, and that's been very welcome. So it does show that just how this strategy underpins a lot of what we do across the council. So thank you. I fully support this paper.
Thank you, Councillor McCoy. And I think I'll endorse everything that you said. So Councillor Garrett and then Councillor Foster. Councillor Garrett.
Hello. Yes, it was specifically on this point about the investment property portfolio, actually. It's become sort of in the national press quite controversial issue, with some councils getting, I think, in above their heads, not naming any in particular, although I did used to live in Spelthorne, funnily enough, borrowing extremely large amounts of money, and including, I spoke to somebody at a very small district council where it was a huge multiple of their annual revenue. So I think nationally it's become quite controversial. I know the government has been sort of looking at it, but I know we've been supportive of this since the beginning as the opposition, and looking at the properties that we bought here, I think we have been quite sensible in terms of what we bought. And I think what we're finding out actually is there's no such thing really as a risk-free investment. But I think as long as, as long as the fundamentals of the property are sound, I think ultimately those investments certainly won't be losing us money. And I think if you look exactly as you said, Richard, if we weren't going to do it, we would have to find another way of finding this money, and it is quite a reasonable amount of money. So I think as long as we're in that happy zone where we're neither going crazy in the way that some councils have, while at the same time taking advantage of the benefit, I think it's quite sensible. The one thing I would say, just picking on what Lida was saying, the figures in the report I think are pre-COVID, so I think it's a good idea to come back next year. But I think it's pretty obvious that the figures are going to look much less rosy. But I suppose from my point of view, as long as we're at least breaking even and it's not becoming a liability, then really the whole thing remains a sensible plan. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Garrett. That's really helpful. Did you want to come back, Mr. Simpson?
I was just going to, so briefly that. Thank you, Councillor Garrett. So I would just, it will be when we come back in April, but I'll just just provide clarity around some of the figures in the appendix, because you get the valuation of the property, and I think we all know we saw some negative numbers in last year, and that's mostly caused by the last week of the year. It was very difficult for valuers to value properties on the 31st of March, as you can probably imagine. But I would expect to see the values go down again during this year. If we're valuing halfway through the year, that doesn't necessarily mean that rents are going to go down in the short term. So you're always going to get a bit of a kind of dip in valuations, but particularly where you've got long-term leases in place, then we're quite confident that you will still get a positive return. I was predicting the end of the year we should still get a positive net return on our portfolio. Our debt is all fixed, so our debt isn't going to move around. But I think values of some properties will clearly take a hit in this financial year, as you would expect. So just to give that context about the two different variables.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Absolutely. Councillor Foster.
My question, well, it was a comment firstly, looking at the corporate landlord model. It was just on page 76. I did read it, Leader, and the paragraphs 3 and 4 don't actually link. I think there's been a slight mess with those two paragraphs, because paragraph 4 does not link to paragraph 3. But it was more a question of this new model. If you are changing the method we measure by, how are you going to actually be able to measure it against previous year's performance?
Thank you, Councillor Foster. You see, Mr. Norah, I told you we read the report in detail. Can you answer Councillor Foster's question?
Certainly, yeah. So we will be looking at the asset management plan data that is different to the data that Richard's referred to in the IPP. So the IPP data we will still continue to measure on the same criteria, so that's on a like-for-like basis. What we will be doing is having further sets of property data around suitability, condition, accessibility, and all of the relevant property data to make decisions that we've not done for a period of time, to ensure that we have that available to us to assist in that decision making. Does that answer your question, Councillor Foster?
Yeah, it's the measurement. When you carried out the review, I noticed that there wasn't any external of the previous strategy. There wasn't an external overview of that. It was carried out, I think the report says, by officers, members and others, but it didn't have a specialist overview. We're now moving to a different sort of measure and a different management method, and that's always, if you're going to review it, how do you compare apples with oranges? That's my concern. That's all.
Yes. Point noted. Some of this is about making sure that we have, for example, utilisation data, so we know how well our assets are performing in terms of the space that's available to use, and for that relevant area of service delivery as well.
Point well made, Councillor Foster. I think, Mr. Norrell, going forward, we need to think about how we ensure that we are doing like for like. Otherwise, it's difficult to make a comparison. But we understand why we're progressing in the way you suggest. Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Norrell, thank you for the briefing you gave Tim Crowley and me a few days ago. That was very helpful. I think there are a number of issues that we discussed then, which I think are still important now. What I can make of it, there are three key strands to this policy. One is our utilisation of existing property and its, if you like, historical association with its users. The second one is the current investment portfolio. And the third is really future investment and disposal. Now, I'm concerned, as I told you before, about how this process is going to be managed to fit in with the council's objectives and to ensure it progresses effectively, because you're aware of the difficulties of dislodging people's historical associations with various buildings and so on, to make sure that the best utilization is made of property. What are you going to do? What's the management structure going to be to make sure this happens?
Who'd like to answer that? Mr. Laurel?
Yes, I can come in on that point around utilisation and how we manage that process. So the corporate landlord model aims to look at bringing all of those functions that you've referred to together. So we have a strategic overview of all of our assets and property functions in one place. It doesn't necessarily detract from a service being delivered from that building, but what we will look at is how that asset is being used and whether or not actually we can use the space within those assets better and smarter. That also connects back to other themes within the strategy, for example, such as co-location or different approaches to service delivery where it's appropriate to do so.
Okay, can I follow up on that? If you're going to go for this corporate landlord model, does that mean you'll actually be charging services for the space they use?
No.
No.
Would that not encourage them to release space if that were the case?
No, I found in the past, Councillor Hicks, that playing shops with council money doesn't create the right incentives because it's not their money.
Okay.
If it was real money to them, you may do what you're suggesting. I think in this case, you can get accountability and responsibility in different ways.
Okay.
So I think to add to Mark's first point, I suppose what we tried to do through this strategy is make it everyone's business in the council, in terms of this is what it costs to run our estate, and making that connection back to services so they understand it. So Mark's been engaging with parts of the council I don't think who'd had that much engagement with the assets team, who have been situated in some of our buildings that aren't Civic or Denmark Road. And they're actively, they want to engage. So they want to understand how they could make different use of the building or more flexible use of the building or bring in partners. But I think, as Mark said, having all the information in one place will allow us to make, it is what it says on the tin, isn't it? Make corporate decisions about the best use of particular assets to achieve the council's objectives, rather than a decision that might look right in one service, but they could be using a different building to do the same thing, and they could be more connected to a library or to another service. So I think that's what we're trying to do with this.
Who will be making those corporate decisions on the best utilisation then?
So I think it depends on the scale of those decisions. So it would be in line with the council's current governance. So, some decisions will be made by Strategy and Resources Committee. Some decisions in terms of making better use of assets wouldn't, I don't think, need a political decision on them, because they're just about operating within the council's current budget and operating within the council's current priorities. So I think it really depends on the size and scale of the decision.
So if there were utilisation review highlighted the fact you needed new premises and to abandon old, that would be dealt with internally?
New premises for the council?
For the council staff, yes, you might find more economic to adopt new premises.
Something of that scale would feels like a strategy and resources decision, if I'm picking up what you're describing correctly.
Is there a timetable attached to this strategy?
It's a 5-year strategy.
Okay, when would the utilisation bit be completed?
I think we would definitely have, so it would be annual updates to this committee each year. So we'd definitely be in a really good place by this time next year. I think we could probably bring an update, Leader, if you're happy. When we bring an update on the IPP, we can bring a bit of an update on the work that we've done. We will be in the 6-month period up to April. Other things, other priorities aside, I suppose, in terms of what's happening across the council and where Mark gets dragged into setting up local test centres and all sorts. But I think we could definitely add that to the paper for April. An update on that piece of work.
Okay, well, can I just say that as a Conservative group, we intend to abstain on this report because we feel there needs to be more detail provided. So if we were at the stage where you're at your 6-month update, I think we may be in more position to agree to it. So we will be abstaining on the project on this.
And that's absolutely, you're right, Councillor Hicks. I'm just puzzled because we're being asked to adopt the new asset strategy, to note the performance, and as I say, it's coming back again in April. And that's what the third point says, to bring it back in April. So what is the point that you're abstaining on?
We are abstaining on that we don't think that actually you developed it sufficiently for decisions to be made. It's a statement, which is fine, but I think we would need more detail on issues like the developments at the Royal Marsden, where there's actually a demolition order out at the moment to knock down some of the buildings. We want further discussions on these whole issues, and we're not going to agree to something which says go ahead at the moment.
But we're being asked to adopt a strategy, an overarching strategy, and to note the performance. How does that then get into individual buildings? I'm puzzled.
Because the individual buildings are listed and are in delegated authority to officers, and we really do need to discuss those in more detail at political level.
And I absolutely recognise that, and I don't see any reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. I'm just puzzled why that stops you voting on this particular report. But as I say, it's your right, so I'm not going to argue. I'm just genuinely puzzled why specific concerns on specific buildings stop you agreeing to this report.
As I said, I don't think this is developed sufficiently for us to support it. We would like to see more work done on it before we make accept any recommendations.
Okay, that's fine. Councillor Garrett, you wanted to come in?
Yes. I mean, I actually said that it was on a different topic, but then David actually switched to the topic, to the thing that I was going to talk about, which is on section 7.1, pages sort of 68 to 69, about the Council Hub. One of the concerns, I think what David's sort of pointing out, is partly the wording in there could be construed to support the action that is currently being undertaken. There's an active planning application under consideration for the demolition and essentially the clearance of the entire site, which David and I, as ward councillors and Councillor Pascoe, also absolutely do not support. There's no planning application to see how those buildings could be used. There's simply a plan to clear the entire site, including of some historic buildings. I mean, some that are not historic that no one's going to weep over, but some that definitely are. That we've never seen any justification for why those buildings need to be cleared. And the wording in here, to my mind, would appear to indicate that we're supporting that plan, and we're absolutely not supporting that plan. And I suppose the other question is, I'm fascinated by why it is that Councillor Dombey is so fascinated with our motive for abstaining, which doesn't alter the decision. But in any case, though, that wording under action and commitment on halfway down page 69, I'm absolutely determined that those words are not going to be thrown back at me at some future point when inevitably I object to that demolition should you decide to proceed with it. So if for no other reason, I can't possibly vote for this for that reason.
And I absolutely understand that point. It was genuine interest on my part, Councillor Garrett. The reason that we moved to a committee system is because we believe it leads to better decision making, and there have been many examples of where the opposition have asked to change the recommendations, to add recommendations, which we've accepted because it has meant better decision making. So I was just interested to see what the point was, but clearly that's your decision, and I understand what you're saying about the London Council Hub. I think you're reading too much into that. I'm not sure that what you're talking about is actually covered by this report. That's more about the actual planning application. But as you say, I'm not going to labour the point, and this is the administration's asset strategy. So I suggest we do move to the recommendations. Can we agree, noting the abstention of the opposition group, can we agree recommendations 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3, noting that an additional report will come back to the April 2021 Strategy and Resources Committee. Is that agreed? And I'm seeing on the chat that everyone is agreeing, with the abstention of the Conservative group. So thank you very much for that. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your hard work. We've achieved a lot this evening. Thank you again, Ms. Bailey, if you'd like to pass on our thanks to all council staff, because these really are exceptional times, and we can see how committed our council staff are to ensuring that we get through this.